The business model involves trying to work across a traditional business model around newspapers, the online version, and then now, of course, there's the kind of iPad version intervening there. And how do you kind of keep every business model juggled and afloat? And I guess the other question, and you know, speak as long as you like about this because it's complicated, is the question of work practices within journalism and newsrooms. So how do you keep the good journalists happy, satisfy the advertisers, which will be very key to your business model, and have an eye to the consumers? So we've got about 3 hours.
So, collapsing business models. Does everyone know what's going on in the US? So is everyone looking at the numbers that's happening over there? They've gone from apparently a $60 billion industry to a $20 billion industry in about 2 years, newspapers, which is pretty dramatic, obviously. It's tremendously dramatic. And there's a lot of, I guess, gnashing and wailing of teeth about this. And there's a little bit of two things that are happening in the US. There's an economy issue, which actually happened in Australia in the 80s with the newspaper industry. The newspaper industry shrunk in the 80s because of the economy issue. And there's also got the digital thing overlaid. So they've got two things happening in the US. And we're starting to see a little bit of that here. And I guess I see my role as, I've always worked in a newspaper publisher, but only in digital roles, which makes me kind of a strange beast. But I see my role as as I said to Matthew Moore one year at a Christmas party, my role is to give you a surfboard while this tsunami comes over, to help not save, but keep journalism afloat within this tumultuous time. So part of that is we do a lot of work around understanding how people use the media across our products as well as across multiple products. So we look at television, radio, print, online, etc., mobile, iPad. And we're becoming more scientific about this. We're looking at how people move through the day. So before, we were very much concentrated on getting out a newspaper at night and then just finishing. And now we're starting to talk openly within Fairfax about how we deliver journalism from 6 AM to 2 AM. So it's quite a pretty big shift. And part of that is understanding when people want news. So we know that people want news at 9 AM. They really want news at that point. That they have a bit of an ambivalence to news in the day. So we, from our website's point of view, we see that as a time to entertain people. And people are going to ask me about the tone of the newspaper, I'm sure, versus the website. And then in the evenings, we see that as an opportunity for us to continue a conversation with our readers by putting in long-form video, because we know that people who consume media have a preference for drama, action, and adventure in the evenings, which isn't in the news category, by the way. It's in the media category, but it's not the news media category. And we're trying to work out how we extend beyond just news into entertainment and into other areas.
Secondary question is, as someone who worked, wow, I'm covered dating myself now,
Yep.
in newsrooms in the late 80s and into the early 90s, newsrooms, as my friend Karen Fuller, who I work with at the Sydney Morning Herald knows,
Yep.
worked in a, I mean, it's no accident that we talk about chief of staff, you know, that there was a kind of hierarchy, there was a particular way of running newsrooms then. And there are a lot of people, probably some of the best people in the industry, who are still trained from that era.
Yep.
And what's the challenge like from a business and a managerial point of view, and also a conceptual, innovative point of view, in working with some of the best minds in the business who've been trained in that period?
There's going to be a transition period. I don't know if anyone's read The Wealth of Networks. It's about how networks work and network theory. It is a pretty wonky book, but it's actually worth reading. And actually Clay Shirky, Jeff Jarvis, Jay Rose and all those guys their ideas come out of this book. And what it means is we're becoming, our newsrooms, and this is how digital newsrooms work, by the way, is they're networked collaboration newsrooms. So the Sydney Morning Herald, Age, Brisbane Times, WA and Canberra Times websites are a network of sites that work together and who hand stories across to each other. And that's how we work in the web. And that's because we are of the web. in the print part of the business that I'm part of, there is an industrial model within that. So everything's about getting to that one point of birth of the newspaper and then releasing it. And so there's different deadlines, different workflows, different ways of thinking, and different trust levels that you do in digital that are quite different to print. And that is a fundamental difference, and pulling these things together is something that I have to actually work with the Gary Linnells, etc. in Fairfax, because we need to bring the two worlds together if we're going to bring, keep the newspaper vibrant and working, as well as keep a digital audience vibrant and working.
The old word for it was goodwill, but now people talk about brands. And one of the things that I will question, let's narrow it down, let's talk about political journalism, let's talk about the press gallery. And some of the people in this room, myself included, have worked in that gallery. And when we think about so-called quality media, one of the things that was appealing to readers, as well as advertisers, or all the kind of business model sources for that, for those brands, was influence on public policy, on politicians, opinion leading. Now, I mean, where do you think that goes when you dilute that brand through the online and so forth? And also when, as we all know, there's been a kind of asset stripping when it comes to the cultural capital of the amount of journalistic knowledge involved in those papers. I mean, you have some standout people, but we've certainly asset stripped that, haven't we?
I don't know about asset stripped. There's about 800 journalists across Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, so, and our online team. So we're pretty big as far as journalism goes.
But how many senior people still working there?
Good question. I don't know how many senior people. I know our Canberra newsroom is about 30 people. It's not a small newsroom. It's a pretty significant. It's, it's bigger than say the 3AW newsroom. It's in Melbourne. So part of the brand of the Herald and the Age and the Fairfax brands is quality, and that quality is great investigations, great opinion pieces, well informed, and that's not going to go away. That's something we need to keep doing. There's public good journalism that we're going to continue doing, but there is another part which I might go to a quote from the managing editor of Verdensgang.no in Norway. They're part of a group called Schibsted, probably the most successful media company in the world at the moment. And he said, news is like water, that a newspaper is like a bottle of Evian water, which has got clearly a start, a middle and an end, and it's a beautiful, clear water. And that websites are like dirty waterfalls. He said that you've got to continually feed them, there's a hunger for them. They're both water, they're both news, but they're a very different type of news. And we've got a newsroom that's going to have this constant pressure to put the stuff into the public space, quick, fast, and at the same time we have to balance that up by putting out this beautiful bottle of water every night. I don't know if that answers your question, but it shows you that.
No, it absolutely does, and I wouldn't want to be your defamation lawyer. I mean, on the online stuff. Now, I'm going to just throw a little, I want to talk about interactive consumption, but I also want to, and I'm going to use an example of one of my children, not because it's my child, but because it was this moment that really gave me a visceral sense of something, which I hadn't grasped before, because sometimes when things happen personally, you grab them. So about a year ago, my child, who was then 11, was really angry that, and this is a New South Wales thing, there's a guy called Fred Nile who wanted to stop ethics classes in schools because he only wants religion taught in scripture classes.
I like
she doesn't have any.
Thank you for that interjection.
Opinion.
Point taken. Anyway, and he was bugging me to write an opinion piece for the Herald, and I said, I don't have time. And I said, well, you write one, you've read lots of things I've written, you have a go. Then he did. He wrote 300 words, and it was all right. It wasn't, didn't knock his socks off, but it was okay. And so he then said to me, well, I've written this, you've got to send it through to Julian Lee at the Sydney Morning Herald, who runs, the National Times, this online opinion thing. And I was shamefaced then, so I had to send it through to Julian with multiple apologies going on. This is ridiculous, my 11-year-old wrote this, I'm really sorry, but I promised him I'd do it. Lo and behold, Julian decided to publish it because it was an 11-year-old writing about Fred Nile's intervention in this debate, and obviously it was novel. I hadn't foreseen this. And then the Twitter feed went off like you can't believe, like it trended up Twitter, because all these people, of course, were saying, oh, how hilarious is 11-year-old sticking it to Fred Nile. And it went off on Facebook and everywhere else. And then, of course, what happened was I started getting Sunrise calling saying, would your 11-year-old like to go on breakfast television? I don't think so, he's got school, you know. And it was this sort of media circus for about a week, which I was able to fend off being a journalist. And at the time I was thinking, what about someone who doesn't have any understanding of the media environment? The fact that you can have any 11-year-old, and my 11-year-old was no smarter than any other 11-year-old in the country, you know, maybe if you had more access to understanding how you write something, who can actually then go right to the most read article on the National Times site. So that you've got this, it's not just about people interacting through comments, but you've actually got this opportunity for people to go into that media space that was once reserved for the so-called special people in the media. Can you reflect on not just the comment stuff and that interactivity or people feeding news in, but about the fact that people have a platform now, and what does that mean in this space?
Julian Disney, he said to me one day that, you know, this internet, it's a cacophony of, like, you know, of voices, and I said to him, to you it may be a cacophony, but to me it's music. But I have been re-evaluating that a little bit recently, and there's been a lot of articles about, you know, the public discourse just sort of spiralling down and down. The piece that Green wrote the other week on the ABC Drum, when he talked about public discourse has become like this he said, she said stuff, and it's not just in media, but it's in politics as well. It's a beautiful piece, and he points to an example of when John Laws interviewed Paul Keating.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and Paul Keating, someone called up, it was about Mabo, and someone called up and basically just said, why is this, it's unequal, you know, these Aboriginals get special treatment, why don't normal Australians get special treatment? And Paul Keating just basically said to him, you don't know what you're talking about, you know, and it was a beautiful way of discussing an issue in an informed way, and Green's point at the end of it was that that kind of smart discourse is not happening anymore, and I was like, yeah, I think he's right, and I think the media needs to try and help bring that back. Now, how we do it is $1 million question, but I think there's awareness of this.
Well, I'd like to finish on this before we go to Q&A, because I actually think this is a point that brings together both the noble fourth estate ideals, you know, the sort of higher ideals and ethical engagement. I would call it an ethics of engagement.
Yeah.
And I'm going back to your point about virality and how, well, you know, I mean, in terms of, say, my son, I could protect him from all of this stuff, but I was thinking, if he was the same kid living somewhere with parents who were naive about this, they might have said, yeah, go on Sunrise. Well, how cool.
There's an example, Corey from East Melbourne, remember when he was on media? But he owned that ACO chick.
and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, oh, these so-called ordinary people can't do this. I think that, and that they're all vulnerable, and it's only people who've been trained who can do it. I mean, I think all of us can melt under the glare of it, and some of us have been in it and know what that's like. Yep. And I'm with John Birmingham about that. I guess what I'm saying, though, is that it can be such a feral space, both the traditional media space and with the addition of online and social media, it heats that space up in ways that are unpredictable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the spot fires start where you wouldn't expect them to.
Yeah.
And so that's the last question I'll leave you with, which is, let's move away from business models and let's talk about what does journalism look like in terms of ethics, in terms of a broader social picture. How would we demarcate that from a space in which you've got people not just retweeting or redistributing things via Facebook, but often adding things, adding comments. I mean, comments become part of the story, don't they? So do you think it's possible anymore to think about a professional journalism or a kind of a frame of reference for that? Or is it all bled out?
That is a very big question. And it's kind of going into bits where obviously this is very much my opinion. So, newspapers and news organisations should be of the community. I think totally have to be a community and have to be a barometer of it and part of it. And one argument I do have, and someone can ask me a question if I'm wrong about this, is you can't give people medicine if they don't want to have it. But there is some times when you do need to give people information because it's public good information. So there is still a need for professional journalism to get the stories that no one else is going to spend the time doing. But it's kind of comes down to Jeff Jarvis's view, which is, you know, do what you do best and link out to the rest, which it could also be socialise to the rest, comment to the rest. Do you know what I mean? So there is going to be professional journalism, but I think it will get smaller because currently, and I have to touch on the business models around where the money's moving, they've moved from, you know, everyone's read Medium is the message, where, you know, the newspaper owned Medium, to a much more distributed medium, and basically it's going to create a lot of issues.
Thank you. Now, I'll just finish before I take questions, say something really quickly, and I think it's almost kind of like an important thing to acknowledge, but a great friend of mine, and actually Karen could call us as well, Margot Kingston,
yep.
was the person who did the first online site at the Sydney Morning Herald, Web Diary. Yep. Yes. But one of the interesting things about Margot was very quickly doing Web Diary, where she very quickly, being Margot, invited readers to contribute and even write, not just contribute comments, but write things, which was, and she did it very early in the mid-90s. And
yes.
she decided she had to write a code of ethics for online behaviour. And so I think that maybe we're still in an evolutionary space about how there's a shared ethics, which isn't just a top-down ethics that newspapers hand down, but maybe something collaborative where people in that space are involved.
Yeah, I mean, there's a shared ethics because if you're not, if you're out of touch with what mainstream Australians are thinking, then in the end no one's going to be part of what you're doing. So you kind of do have a shared ethics. I think that's sort of the short answer to that.
All right, well let me take questions because we could just...
I did want to point out something, the Canberra question before, and just an interesting little story around Canberra. As we're doing this newsroom review, we're looking at, you know, starting, do we start at 6 in the morning and then 7 in the morning, etc., etc. And we started talking about Canberra, and what we discovered about Canberra is Canberra actually has quite a different beat, and it's very much a beat around what they call getting front pages of newspapers. So they release things at, say, 6 p.m. or looking for mainstream television. And Canberra seems like it's the less evolved part of the media at the moment, to me. Whereas I know that the peak time for media is morning, papers, middle of the day, websites, commute home, and then in the evening. So there's multiple levels, and the Canberra hasn't quite got that yet. And that's actually the politicians and their media advisors haven't quite understood that yet, which is quite interesting.
You're saying they live in a bubble? No.
Well, what I'm saying is they're missing an opportunity where they could actually get to more people if they released it at 11 a.m. And they're not doing it. And I had this discussion at an NGO conference that I spoke at as well, that there's all these other opportunities and everyone's concentrating just on the paper, which you should still do as part of your media, but you need to think about the other times of the day too.
Sasha Callahan, I'm an academic, I'm a health law and bioethicist, so really, hi, I'm an ordinary person who loves the internet.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to pick up on two things that you said,
yes.
Which was two comments that you made. One was that that newspapers, or in particular, I think Fairfax papers, are interested in moving into sort of entertaining people at night. But you also later in your talk talked about how you lamented the lack of more thorough debate and informed engagement, I guess, on sort of important issues. And as a consumer of media and a lover of the internet, I think that the media in Australia lacks balls, basically. And really, I think what people who love the internet like best is curated content. So you're always looking for the best blogger or the best, you know, news outlet or whatever in the world to say, this is what is important from our perspective. You know us, you love us, you trust us. This is what's important. This is what we should offer you. Do you think that news outlets in Australia have the balls to be news outlets and to just say, this is what you should be reading, we're great at it, and this is our offering, and you can, you know, we'll put it behind a paywall and make it work for you?
Okay, there's a couple of parts to that. So when I talked about entertainment, it may not be under the same brand with Sydney Morning Herald Age. So that's a good point. In fact, they wouldn't be under the same brands because we can't put the same kind of entertainment content under those news brands. Around the balls issue, the way the economics of digital media works right now is about mass. Google, Facebook, everything's about mass reach. And if we want to survive as a viable media company into the future, right now, we need to be a bit about mass. Now, that means we balance up a couple of things. Sometimes we put things on our websites that I don't agree with, but I'm not a dictator as far as editorial goes. But we quickly can tell whether it's good or not. We've done mistakes in the past. I can tell you some terrible mistakes we've done in the past. But now our guys are much more mature around, and the reality is most of them are my age or younger, they're much more mature around the way they're choosing the news. So the thing that heartens me the most is around choosing the big stories. So Craig Thompson, yesterday when he did his speech in Parliament, we had about 7 stories, including the live stream of that above the fold on the SMH Age, Brisbane Times, WA, everywhere, because what we know is that when the stories are really important, it heartens me Australians do read them. So it's a big important story, they do. But in the other times when there's not much news happening, and I think there's a book by the guy who runs fark.com talks about this, 90% of the time there's not that much news happening, and there's a 24/7 news channel that creates this churn. I'm aware of that, and you're very aware of that, and we're probably all aware of that because we're all quite media savvy. But we, from a business point of view, need to fill that void. And I know that we've got those people, and then when the big story happens, Craig Thompson happens, bang, you hit them, and you do the ballsy stories. So there's been an approach, and Australia did this on their website, and so did, I think, a few other news websites do this, where they say, here's the most important story of the day that's been in the newspaper, and we're going to put it on the website for the next 5 hours. Well, guess what? People hit it, and they read it, and they go, and they come back, and it's still the same, and they leave. And we just know they go. So we're kind of in this tug of war to keep people. I call it the one-to-many homepages problem. So right now we build one homepage to hit many people. And in fact, we're hitting boomers, which are the biggest group, and the next biggest group are Gen Y. And we're trying to service both those, and it's actually quite difficult. And right now we build one web page, and it hits all of them. And we're going to change that to be rather a little bit more personalised and changed depending on where you've come from, what you read before, which is actually quite a significant change. So you'll get many-to-many homepages, and your view will be slightly different to my view, slightly different to Marie's, etc.
James Morrow here, ex-journalist, telecommunications, blogger, American, Australian by the grace of God. Your answer just now about that sort of fart thing, relentless promoing of these sorts of things, and you see 400 comments of people just getting angry, punching each other up. At one point, though, there is the real potential with the web for there to be this interaction, actually, and break down that kind of ex cathedra from on high newspaper thing, and get actual influence from the reader. We talked about that with Web Diary, which had a lot of problems, but as a model was a thing. And yet, I think that interface. We've seen the Herald try and come along with Judy Prisk as a reader's editor, but that experiment has taken a lot of flack, is not really answering a lot of criticisms. Where do things go to actually create that true sort of thing where there is that push and pull between that, or should there not be, and should journalists and newspapers say, well, look, we've studied how to do this stuff, we do know what we're doing, we're the professionals. Where do you draw the line and how do you work that?
I keep saying we're in transition, but I think media is going to be in transition for the next 20 years or until I retire. So I'm 36 now, so I've got a bit of time. So, there's going to be this massive transition. So, to answer your question, we're a little bit on high, I think, still, our papers, and they need to get a little bit further down with the people, and we're not doing as good a job as we can, but we're working a lot on doing that, and that's actually social training, etc.
Can I just weigh in on that too? Because I find it I'm 50 now, and at one point in my career I was letters editor of the Herald, and that's how it worked. That was reader feedback. Apart from those envelopes where people wrote all around the back, right? And so many of us here have had those. And so, of course, and Darren and I were talking about this incredible resistance that a lot of older journalists have to the idea that they should not just respond to readers, but also dip back into stories and respond and see them as organic and ongoing, which they are now. And I think that we're also talking here about a mindset. Now, I think some people are quite good at evolving or remaining open in what I would call an ethics of engagement, which is, you know, probably they've already had that ethic engagement, which is to see that there's a democratic kind of framework in which one has to understand media consumption and production, or I would say media use and production, and that media users are now producers. And I think that we are, in that sense, through the looking glass with that. And that changes the entire ballgame when it comes to professional journalism. And I don't think it means we need to ditch the concept of professionalism, but it means we have to recraft what it means to be professional as a journalist. And that means actually not, I mean, what the muddying thing in the water is that feral space where you get all that, we've all talked about that, you know, all those crazy flaming people who just seem perpetually angry like they're in traffic. But there are other, beyond that, there's Twitter, which I think is fantastic. There are a whole range of ways in which people are engaging, which are extending and expanding the possibilities.
Dorothea over at Startups. Now it seems like I kind of hold the cards in a way where I'm being fed editorial pieces that I can back in my ads to. So obviously this is in print. So how do you think that's affecting you guys and your credibility? But further to that, how do you think consumers how do you think their perceptions change of press when they see those overlaps?
Church and state, I totally believe in don't deceive the reader. That's actually my own motto. So when people come to me with ideas, they say, whatever you do, just don't deceive the reader, pretend to be something you're not. So having the ability to, here's a story about whatever, and putting a press ad next to that that's related to that story, I don't see any issue with that. People are smart enough to see, here's a story and here's an ad. But I do have issues if someone in an agency comes over and says, here's a great idea and here's how to write it, and we just write it and do it that way. And that is not good journalism, because in the long run, you will break the trust, you will deceive, and your brand will be in jeopardy. Now, there's always tension between editorial and sales, and I think that's healthy. As long as you have tension and you can work it out creatively, that's okay. I think it's the way it's going to be, but it's got to be a very a clear and precise discussion around these issues. So, you know, because I've come from the website area, there's been some things that we've done that, you know, I actually aren't happy with, but at the same time, and I've said no to quite a few different things. So you, sometimes you've got to balance it, but at the same time, every time I'm told, hey, do this, it's going to, you know, make us $200,000, I always discard the $200,000 number. I don't care about that. I just think, is this deceiving? And is this basically going to be mistaken for something else? And if it is, I always push back on this. And I think it's just about your brand, you have to do that.
No, I just want to add to that, because I want to put, you know, not only my own historic perspective in, but I mean, I wrote my PhD on tabloid media and its influence, which goes back to 19th century journalism. And one of the things that I noted over the many years I wrote that PhD was how driving the commercial models, which is why I was referring to Marx before. I mean, you know, when I say I'm not a Marxist, I'm certainly someone who's very left-leaning in my understandings of the world and politics. And I mean, there's no question you have to follow the money if you want to look at the fourth estate. If you want to look at what journalism can do and what the higher ideals are, it has to be funded. You know, and if journalism started out with very partisan newspapers, with proprietors who told people what to write. I mean, the breakthrough was when tabloids started, when human interest started, and when it became democratised, and that was the breakthrough for journalists getting into courts and parliament and places like this. So actually, the journalism we despise was the hinge that tipped that over. And you know, when I remember studying at the Herald and the chief sub saying to me, don't think your stories are important, they're just the white spaces between the ads. So, you know, the reality is that most media in Australia is commercial. There are issues about media ownership and concentration, we know all of those. We've seen small magazines come and go, we're now seeing small websites. I don't want to see them go, but I suspect they may. let's actually be pragmatic and real about how we support a fourth estate and democracy and all the ideals I think probably most of the people in this room will believe in, and recognise that advertising and a commercial model has to be part of that. Otherwise I've got to say, and I think Darren was kind of gesturing at this, but I don't mind the barbarians, I don't like that word, but the people being inside the gate repainting the castle in garish colours, but you're not going to get gatekeeping, you're not going to get professionalism. And if we're talking about the fourth estate, or the fifth estate, if we might call it that, we actually do need people holding standards of professionalism up, defending objectivity, which is never real but something we aspire to, looking at things like defamation law, for goodness sake, which we still live with, there needs to be some sort of protective gatekeeping, and I think we have to respect the fact that it's driven by a commercial model. But it was ever thus. It's not like this is new, it's just a question of how this commercial model works.
I'm Rachel, I'm from the Newspaper Works, I'm the media specialist, and I have a long career in media and advertising. And now I represent the newspaper industry. But off the back of that, what I wanted to say is I've represented some of the biggest clients in Australia from a media perspective and an advertising perspective. Publishers have to be really, really careful that in this particular issue, they don't cut off their nose to spite their face. Because if I had $1 for every client that has come to me and said, I want an ABC type audience, and obviously you can't buy that, and I think for good reasons you shouldn't be able to buy that. And I think publishers need to be really careful that they understand where that commercial relationship begins and ends. And if they disenfranchise their audience into this world where everything is a commercial transaction, they lose a certain quality audience, which advertisers really prize. And I think that's something that marketers have to take responsibility for as well, because a lot of marketers are banging on the gate saying, we want this, we want more, we want editorial, we want this. And that what they're actually doing is they are cutting off their nose to spite their face. And longer term, what they really want is the trust and the dependency and the truth that comes through the newspaper channel that for generations people have prized. And once you start to blur that line too far with commerciality, you lose that. So everybody loses. The papers lose, the marketers lose. So marketers also need to take responsibility for that.
My name's Amy. I'm a health reporter at the Herald. I wanted to ask you about maintaining influence, which is the topic of tonight. I'm interested in how, as we need to fill the demands of ongoing content and driving a story forward, how we actually do maintain the influence of the sort of core journalism that we are putting up as the agenda-setting journalism for the day. I'm just thinking, recently I had a story about Royal North Shore Hospital. And traditionally the way you do that is you put it on the front page of the paper and then everyone chases after it for the day. And that's you sort of setting the agenda, whereas now we want to keep adding content to that and keeping that as our own story. But that really changes, either we end up having to sort of lose the story down in the website and other stuff replaces it, or we have to be trying to sort of get dribs and drabs to update it, and then we can't really be sort of going for the next agenda setting story on the topic the next day. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
And there's a lot of debate about how we do this. It's an internal process where we're looking at the newsroom across the whole country, and we've got very senior practicing journalists within that group, Darren Goodsir, Steve Foley, Gay Alcorn, these people who are super influential, and we're discussing this all the time. I think there's a couple of things we need to do as a print journalist is to think more like a PR agency. And this sort of shocks people a little bit, but we've got to think about, okay, I've got a great story, which I'm going to set the agenda, but I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to take that story and I'm going to drive that for 3 days so people understand what this story is about. And one of the things that we've possibly been doing a lot, especially in print, is we write the story, put it up on the front page. Yes, it sets the agenda, totally, radio, etc. The radio, television, etc. take it, and then they own it. And you know what? The people who read it or watched it or whatever thought, oh, that's a great story by Channel 9. Oh, that's a great story by 3AW. And I think we've been giving away our advantage for many years, and we need to start owning that and taking that and keep driving that through. Now, yes, sure, there's times when you need to do something fresh for the next day, but the reality is if we did 3 great stories a day, every day, across all our newspapers that were agenda setting, that would be pretty flooded, would flood the zone. Do you know what I mean? So I think, again, I think it was Jeff Jarvis who said we need to think more like digital marketers and journalists coming together, think about how we can take our stories, engage with the audience, not just publish it and walk away. And newspapers can actually do that because we have the journalism power, etc. to do that, and the smarts. The newspapers are still going to be the agenda setting part of the morning. This is what they are, and we know all the other medias read it and are part of it.
Paul McIntyre. 2 heads I write for the Fin Review and I edit a trade magazine. It's on the commercial side, following the money. Catherine's point is digital, margins, advertising yields way down in digital versus print, right? So when you talk about sustaining the journalism model, how do you fund it when these people don't want to pay the same rate in a print for the same set of eyeballs they do online? You have that big issue there. How do you do that? How do you actually sustain journalism when the money isn't there, the margin isn't there? And also, talking to some of your colleagues like Ed Harrison will say, in terms of an advertising booking, the resource required to process a print ad versus an online digital campaign, 4 times the resource. Ironically, the head hour count, or the head hours, the heads required to deliver an online digital campaign is 4 times what it takes for print. So with those 2 things combined, how do you sustain quality journalism with those 2 headwinds at you?
If I knew that right now, I would be a very rich individual. No, so there's a couple of things. Has everyone read The Innovator's Dilemma, Christensen? It's a fantastic book about new business models that come in and disrupt old business models. A good example is Kodak's been disrupted by digital. Kodak actually created the first digital camera, and in fact couldn't see how to use it and left it away, and now they've disappeared because of that. The reason I talk about that is because in digital, and I don't know whether it's by design or by accident, Fred Hilmer created 2 businesses. He created Fairfax Digital, and he left the print businesses that were going well. And within Fairfax Digital, there was a new way of practicing journalism created, taking the same ethics and the same ideas that, because a lot of these people, all these people came from print, Sydney Morning Herald Age, etc., into it, but new ways of doing it, new ways of thinking about audience. It was a totally different business model. So what we need to do is take that ideas around the business model, and this is the newsroom review, and actually apply it to the newspaper and bring people across. That's going to be hard, and it's going to be very difficult, and there's a large amount of people, resources, print, etc., under one part of the business, and the other part is quite light. The advertisers, if you look at I think I was looking at the Nielsen numbers around mobile, and mobile is going to be $50 million apparently in 2 years' time. So marketers always take quite a lot longer to come behind the audience. So I do think that marketers are going to start getting more and more the idea of the value of digital, and that those yields will.
They'll pay more, you reckon?
Yeah, because we've got to show them why.
Read deeply into media histories. What you always find if you look at business models, if you're looking at transitions from telegraph or print, as in the telegraph, to print, to radio, to television, you can actually trace the business models as well as the cultural and political histories of the way these things work. And they never supersede each other, they map over each other. So when television began, people thought it was a really great, handy way of having televised plays. But we know that's not what it's for. And I think what you're saying is partly we still don't quite know what it's for, and how do we adapt the old model with that?
1.5 million people read the Sydney Morning Herald Monday to Friday each day. Of that, about 200,000 read both print and online.
Okay.
About a bit over 500,000 read print only. About 500,000 read online only in Australia, and about 300,000 read online overseas.
Yeah, I'm Pia. I'm a trading director from Icon Advertising Agency. Okay, very controversial. What happens when the Evian drinkers die?
The print product's going to change to be Evian for next gen. print's going to change, evolve. It's like radio. Radio was disrupted by television, but radio still exists. I don't think print's going to go away because there's some things about print that you just cannot get in digital at all.
Joe Talcott, former media guy, and now just an outsider looking in. Help me with the quote, a good newspaper is like a community talking to itself or something like that. Do you know that one?
Yes.
I'm wondering whether this is an example of the newspaper industry just talking to itself. And from the outside, is this like the music industry that was trying to cling on to CDs and a model that just wasn't going to work in the future?
You're talking about, so the newspapers disappearing again? Newspapers.
Or something that we're not imagining.
Yeah. You know what, I can't imagine it because I can't take my frame of reference out of that. I tried to take my frame of reference out of it a lot though. I think there's a lot of hubris within the industry talking about itself. And who reads the media section of the Australian? Yeah? Yeah, no one else outside of the media reads that section, okay? No one reads Crikey, I'm issuing the media, that kind of stuff. Which is fine, but we sometimes put a lot of energy in talking about ourselves and not just looking out beyond. So I do agree with you. But I don't think print's just going to evolve. It has to evolve. It's not about print's not a breaking news medium. It's a very different medium.
Katie from News Limited, so it'll be quite obvious why I'm asking this question. But you sort of talked about
paywalls.
Yeah, we talked about Evian, which you pay for. The waterfall, you don't. What do you
Why? Fairfax is the most successful digital publisher, one of the most successful digital publishers in the world. We're actually profitable in our digital business, and News, and I know a lot of people at News have stop-started on the web, and so they've got to a point where they have to decide what they can and can't do. If they're not profitable in digital, and we are profitable in digital, then they're going to take a very different route to what we're going to do, and that's all.
But you're not going to charge for people for your journalism. You're no longer going to charge for?
No, we charge by their time on site, i.e. advertising.